Moved by Megan, seconded by Dawn. So you see in here, just to point out, business 8A has an item in it, and then the usual 8D stuff, and then there's some working group reports, basically. Is there anything that needs to be addressed in the agenda before we pass it? Seeing none, we'll vote on the agenda. All those in favor? Oh, yes, Councillor Schell, sorry.
Under other business, could we just talk a bit about King and Queen Streets and the archaeological foundations that are, I should have let staff know, just to sort of discuss what's being found there and recommend that everyone go take a look. King and Ontario. Yes, King, sorry, King and Queen.
Yeah.
Queen and King, yeah.
So we need consent of the committee to add an item under other business, the foundations being uncovered at Queen and King. Mac, do you have something to say? Oh, you want to move it? Okay. Or moved by Councillor Schell, seconded by Mac. Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to just have a very, very, very quick update as to the process for the Kingston Pens designations, just where the committee's at and what their timeline is and so forth. Just very briefly.
Okay. So you've seconded Councillor Schell's addition, and you're making another addition, which is update on the Kingston Pen process. That should be quick. Need a seconder for that? Seconded by Dawn. So there's two additions and under other business. We'll vote on them together. All those in favor? And that carries. So that's section 11. All right. Now, confirmation of minutes from last meeting, October 20th. You've had a chance to look at the minutes. We need them moved and seconded to get them on the floor. Who wants to move it? Moved by Catherine, seconded by Sherman. Any errors or omissions? No? Okay, we'll vote on the minutes. All those in favor? Opposed, and that carries. Disclosure of pecuniary interest. Seeing none, there are no presentations, delegations, or briefings. So we'll get right to business, and business 8A. So this is on every agenda, but it usually doesn't have anything in it. This is the first time there's something in it. So that's exciting. It's civic collection acquisitions, the first report in your package. You'll see there's your quilt, a chair, and some hardware. And I'm looking for, where is he? Yeah, where is he? Oh, sorry, Paul, I couldn't see you in the glare of the sun. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The details of the items that are listed in this particular report are actually in the minutes of the working group at the end of this this package today. But in brief, what you're being asked to recommend for acquisition is a quilt which was made by the residents of Providence Care in 1973 to mark Kingston's tercentenary. It's an interesting piece because it relates to patient care, but also the quilt's design includes signatures of all of the various mayors up until that point. So that's an interesting piece. It's not something that we have. We have an extensive collection of tercentenary pieces. So a nice addition. The other is a council chair, which is actually one of the presentation copies which are given to councillors when they retire from council. It's a tradition which goes back many, many years. And this is actually a reproduction of the chairs you see out in the hallway, the ones we have on display down in the Governing Kingston display down in the John Counter room. And the clerk's office has traditionally kept some of these to be given away. This particular one was actually owned by Dick Myers, who was councillor in 1994 to 97. He's given it back to the city, offered it back to the city for our permanent collection. We actually don't have a copy of one of these with the bronze plaque on it that has his name and date. So it's a nice addition. Those two pieces are for the civic collection, so they're the permanent collection, so that we can use for research, interpretation, display. The last set of things is a set of door hardware. When I say a set, it's a complete set, right down to the screws, which the donor tells me once belonged on the front door of the offices to the Canadian Locomotive Company just down the street. At our working group, it was discussed as to whether or not the hardware as an historic piece was important, and because this history is a bit tangential, we thought not for the civic collection, it's probably not the best way to demonstrate the role of the Canadian Locomotive Company in Kingston. But what is interesting about it is it's a complete set of early to mid-century hardware, complete with the locks and handles and all the bits and pieces. So it's a nice demonstration piece to put in the Heritage Resource Center downstairs when residents come in and to look at various architectural artifacts that we've got or wanting to know more about detailing. So this has come up for recommendation from this committee to council for acquisition to the Civic Collection.
Very interesting and exciting. So I understand that essentially, if you look at the recommendation, council has to accept the acquisitions. There's two different categories that the different things are going into, so there's two different clauses. We can deal with it as one clause. Yeah. So I just need a mover and a seconder to get the recommendation on the floor. Yes, moved by, sorry, before I move it, are there any questions from members of the committee about the acquisitions? Yes, Peter.
I have a comment, if I might make it at some point.
Just wait until we move the recommendation.
Thank you.
Then you'll be free to comment. Any members of the public wish to comment or ask questions about these acquisitions? Seeing none. So yes, now we need a mover and a seconder for the recommendation. Moved by Peter, seconded by Jamie. I just realized, Jamie, you must have childcare today. So, Peter, you wanted to say something.
Thank you. It concerns the hardware from the Canada Locomotive Company. I was recently in Chicago, and I was reminded of the fact when I went to the Art Institute, which is one of the great art galleries of America, that in their probably most visited hall, what they have are a series of bits and pieces of torn down buildings from the 19th century. Now, the designer of these is perhaps more famous than the designer of the front door stuff for the Canadian Locomotive Company. The designers were people like Burnham and Sullivan. But the recognition and honor that design, that industrial design by ordinary industrial processes is given in the Art Institute of Chicago is a reminder of how important these things, which were perhaps taken for granted and were not, were as a result of industrial production, how important they are in allowing us to understand something of the artistic quality of past times. I might also say that the Metropolitan Museum in New York has a collection of the same kind of hardware from Chicago buildings. New York didn't have any buildings of that date nearly as important as Chicago's, but I think this is not to be underestimated. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. And yes, just to remind the committee that the recommendation is that this be a non-collection demonstration object in the Heritage Resource Center, so it would be on display. Is there any other comments? Okay, well, there's two recommendations. We'll vote on them as a whole. All those in favor? Opposed? And that carries. Thank you very much. Items B and C are empty. D, as always, has several items. A couple pre-consultations, a couple permits, and yeah, that's how it looks like today. So the first one is the application for a heritage permit at 23 Sydenham Street. And I see Mackenzie's here to introduce it as soon as we can get the audiovisual going here. Go ahead, Mackenzie.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this application relates to the property at 23 Sydenham Street. This property is located on the east side of Sydenham between Earl and West Street. The property contains a yellow 2.5-story dwelling constructed in 1866 with a side gable roof and intricate panel designs in the front facade, which are attributed to William Newlands. It says Coverdale in your report, but it should be Newlands. The dwelling was previously owned by a prominent Kingston architect, Lily Inglis, and her husband, James Inglis. And this property is designated under Part 5 of the Heritage Act. So you'll notice in your agenda package that this is a bit of a two-part application. We have an application for a demolition and also an application to alter. So the first piece, the application has been submitted to request permission to demolish a small one-story shed at the rear of the property located along Lily's Lane. The shed is clad in a faux brick, and it has no foundation. It features wooden barn-style doors with a single window opening, and it's currently not in very good repair. The applicant has submitted historic documentation demonstrating that the shed was added between 1911 and 1924, and they wish to demolish the shed in response to a property standards order, which requires either its stabilization or demolition. The applicant has no immediate plans for a replacement structure at this time. So this is just a view of Lily's Lane, showing some of the other outbuildings to the rear. So the second piece of the application, the applicant is requesting permission to replace the existing roofing with new asphalt shingles to address some leaking that's happening in the upstairs bedrooms, and also to unify the roofing materials throughout the structure. Currently, the main dwelling has what is likely its original seam roof on the gabled portion of the dwelling, but there's also asphalt shingles above the front porch and likely asphalt or tarred steel above a later stucco addition at the rear. So the applicant has indicated that the porch is in good condition and doesn't require replacement, and the intention is to replace all the roofing materials with new asphalt shingles to match those of the front porch. So this application is designated under Part 5 as part of the Old Sydenham Conservation District. The inventory notes it as a significant property in the district and that it has associated value with James and Lily Inglis. James was a professor at Queen's, and Lily was a renowned heritage advocate and architect in Kingston. And the laneway behind the property was named in her honor after her passing in 2010. This property is the only wood building along the stretch of Sydenham Street, and it features detailed woodwork, and it blends the features of the buildings along Sydenham. Recent documentation has noted that the design of the woodwork can be attributed to another prominent local architect, William Newlands. The property is also within the Beyond Bagot sub-area in the district, which notes attributes such as the wide range of building types, materials, and with different materials and ages, and also rear lanes with outbuildings. So this application has been reviewed against the policies in the district plan, and it meets those policies. This application was circulated to the various internal departments. From a planning perspective, there's no provisions that would preclude the removal of the shed. However, the applicant is aware that once the demolition occurs, they surrender the rights to the setbacks, and that any future development at the back of the property would require compliance with the zoning and official plan policies. This project will also require a demolition permit and a building permit for the roofing if there's structural issues that they encounter. This application was circulated to Heritage Kingston, and we received only 2 comments. One member noted that in consideration of the condition of the shed, he had no concerns. With respect to the replacement roofing, a member suggested that a metal roofing replacement would be better than the asphalt shingles. We forwarded this suggestion to the applicant, and they were exploring some different metal options, but they continued to prefer the asphalt at this time. So Upon review of the submitted materials, staff recommend approval of the submitted application, subject to the conditions outlined in the report. And I'll just for clarification, you'll notice this is a bit of a different recommendation than we normally see. So the first part recommends that this application be forwarded to council at their next meeting. And that's just to address the fact that this is the first meeting on the new schedule. That's now the third Wednesday of the month. And also the applicant wishes to take care of the property standards order before a new owner takes possession at the end of the month. And then also under the Heritage Act, we are required to consult with the Heritage Committee on demolitions. So this is a full recommendation that we're looking for. And then support for the alteration that's under the new process for Part 5s with respect to the roofing replacement. So if there's any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you. Any questions from members of the committee? Yes, questions only. Don?
I understand that there are really two separate parts to the application. One's a demolition, on which we have to make a recommendation, and one is the roof replacement, which we simply support the recommendation. But I'm puzzled by the lead paragraph there, that Heritage Kingston recommends this application be forwarded to council for consideration. I don't think I've seen that sort of wording before, although I may be wrong.
She did address that, but maybe it wasn't clear. It's because this is our first meeting in the middle of the month, and the timing of our meeting, it needs to be forwarded to council next week, which is within the deadline, which means it needs to go on the addendum. It's a procedural thing. Yeah, and you understand that the two things, the shed and the construction, are two different parts of the Heritage Act that apply, so that's why they're separate. Yeah. Okay, so the Part 5 is the part of the Heritage Act that applies. So it's the Part 5 process, right? So that's if you made comments through Dash, were your comments captured correctly? That's the first stage. So there's two people, and one of them's not here. So that's the first question, and seeing none, then it's, yes, members of the public have an opportunity to add comments to the record. Seeing none, and then it's, do you have any oral comments you want to submit at this time for James to put them in the minutes so they'll be on the record? Okay, so then we're gonna have two motions, I guess, eh? Just one? Okay, so there's three clauses. The first clause we've already talked about. The second clause relates to the demolition with the two conditions. And that is the demolition, well, it's a demolition, right? So it's a different permission that's being sought, and that is something that we can recommend directly. And then the second part is that Heritage Kingston supports council's approval. So that's Part 5 language, and that's for the permit for the work. Okay, so that's clear. We need a mover and a seconder for the recommendation. Moved by Councillor Schell, seconded by Jamie. Any discussion about the recommendations? Okay, we'll vote. All those in favor? Opposed? And that carries. Good luck. Another application for a heritage permit, 77-79 Gore Street in Old Sydenham Heritage District. This is also a Part 5 application. It looks like Ryan has this one.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This property is at 77-79 Gore Street. It's located on the north side of Gore Street. between Wellington and King Street East. The property includes a 1.5-story limestone double house. It's designated under Part 5 as part of the Old Sydenham Heritage Conservation District, and it's rated as significant in the district inventory. And that's the double house there. The cultural heritage value, the property dates as early as 1831, and the most distinctive feature on the property is the double house of coarse rubblestone limestone. It's a distinct feature along the streetscape and character of Gore Street in the Sydenham district. The applicants are proposing to replace a recently removed wooden front porch with a new limestone porch. The new porch will include 2 steps. It'll be approximately 56 centimeters from grade. No railings are required because it's so low, but the applicants are proposing one single metal railing in the center. The new porch will have the same dimensions as the existing one, which was recently removed. We reviewed this application and the submitted materials against policies in the district plan, and staff have no concerns with this proposed application. It was circulated to the agencies. No significant comments were received. Building permits are required, encroachment permits are required, and the like, and they're built into the recommended approval. The Heritage Committee was circulated, and those comments have been consolidated into the report and provided to the applicant. No concerns were expressed from the members. There was one note that the applicant could consider the use of wood as opposed to stone for this porch. We did provide that to the applicant, and we do support that recommendation and have built that into the recommended motion that wood could be an alternative to the stone. However, I believe the applicant has noted that they'd like to advance the limestone. That's the desire of the owners, and so that's their plan. So, Mr. Chair, our recommendations are outlined on the screen, and we can take any questions.
Thank you. So this is part 5. So we followed the part 5 process. So the first thing is those of you who made comments in dash were your comments captured adequately. So that's really just Dawn that did that. So as long as there's no problems there, that's that. There's members of the public have a chance to add comments to the file. Yes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to Ryan for the presentation and the report. I would like the limestone myself, because it seems to match what the rest of the building already has. And I don't know how long that wooden porch has been there. It just seems more in keeping with the heritage aspects of the neighborhood. Speaking just as a non-expert. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public? Seeing none, now members of the committee have a chance to add submissions to the minutes to have them included in the file. Okay, we need a mover and a seconder for the recommendation. Moved by Dawn, seconded by Councillor. So there's nothing out of the ordinary with the recommendation as far as this type of application goes. There's the clause that, the first clause is to do with the timing of this meeting. The second clause is, and you'll notice that first clause is identical to the previous application. Second clause describes the application, and then the third clause has the conditions. There's 4 conditions. And it does say wood may be used as an option in place of limestone, so they actually have latitude to do that. And we'll vote on all 3 as one item. Any comment? Yes, Mac.
The only thing I question is it kind of looks like it's drawn like a wood porch. Like the steps, it's got a thin limestone tread on it. Is that what I'm seeing? As opposed to like, I mean, normally limestone stairs are just, piece of limestone. And same as on the deck, it's showing like, a thin, looks to be like, like a wood deck that would show through, or like a wood tread on top of the risers. Is that what I'm actually seeing, or is that what they're proposing?
I was assuming that it would all be stonework, but maybe, does Ryan know the answer?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I actually asked that exact question to the applicant. It's Mr. Peabody that has designed and constructed this, or is constructing this, and he tells me it is a complete limestone construction. So
So it's probably just the drawing, it's just typical,
I think it's the drawing.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. Yeah.
Yeah, and I know there's a stonemason involved, so that's probably why, to get the stonework on the top as well. Okay. Anyone else? Okay, we'll vote on the recommendations. All those in favor? Oppose? And that carries. Now we have a couple of pre-consultations. So these are for consultation purposes. So this is the type of thing that we see before someone has submitted an application, but they want our input in the design process. So this is a great opportunity for people to make helpful suggestions to the project. The first one is 411 Wellington Street in Berryfield, and there's a report. There's some pictures, and it looks like it's a member of staff that will be introducing it. We'll just pause for a moment here. Go ahead, Mr. Leary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will try to set the stage for this one. I understand the owner is here. I'm just waiting for the last members of his team to show up. But I'm sure the committee is familiar with this property. This is 411 Wellington Street. It's the former J.E. Horton School property that is currently vacant. The subject property, the school itself was closed in 2013 and was demolished earlier this year, the building. It's in the Berryfield Heritage Conservation District. It's noted as a non-heritage building in the district. So this is the subject property. The new owners of the subject property are proposing a retirement community / campus, which includes a 3-story apartment-style residence and 2-story terraced row house fronting onto Wellington Street. The concept plans are in your agenda package, and I can bring them up here if need be. The detailed design related to the appearance, material, color of the buildings has not yet been finalized. That will be done following comments from this group, and as part of the application, a heritage impact statement will be required to ensure that the proposed design meets and conforms to the policies and guidelines of the village district plan. The applicants have requested a pre-consultation meeting with this group prior to submitting the full heritage permit application. As part of that process, we do circulate our internal agencies, and staff have summarized their responses in your agenda. Many of them are technical in nature and have been provided to the applicants as information. We also received and circulated to this group who provide preliminary written comments, which have as well been submitted to the applicants. There is a comment we also received from the Berryfield Village Association, which is included as correspondence in your agenda package. I understand the applicants have met with the BVA previously to go over some of their concept plans. So I'm happy to turn it over. Would Mr. Schultz like to speak to this one? do you have a, yes?
Just use the. Okay, so. PD. Oh, sorry. I want the. I'm gonna grab my glasses. Is that the PDF there?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Is there a full screen option? Okay.
There you go.
All right. Thank you, Ryan. So I have with us today, we have Rod Wilson from Signature Retirement Living, and Marcus Letourneau, I think, is on his way. I expect him to be here shortly. So what we'd like to do is just run through briefly this project and perhaps provide a bit more information than what you have in the package, and then open it up for discussion. We're here for pre-consultation. How do I advance this here? Excuse me. There, right? Perfect. Okay. So just a brief part about the history of the project. Before Rod and his group purchased the land, they did do some pre-consultation. You can see on the upper left in May and June of 2016. And they met with both city planning staff and with the Berryfield Village Association to present their ideas for the land and see if there was general support for the project. The land was then purchased in 2016 after there was a general agreement that the project could work on this site. And then starting in September of 2017, which is when we started on the project, there was formal pre-consultation, and we're at that stage now. We're in the process of preparing a zoning application. So to date, we've met with the city planning and heritage staff. We've met with the Berryfield Village Association executive and with their entire association, and then we're here today. And so all of the feedback that we receive will be taken by the project team, and we will revise and evaluate the zoning application before submitting it. And once it's submitted, if it is approved, we would then, as we understand it, be back here to this committee looking for heritage approval on the detailed design of the project. And at the same time, we'd be looking at site plan control, building permits, the usual process. So in 2016, and this was before my time, and Rod is here if you have additional questions, but Rod and his group presented to the Village Association executive a couple of options for developing the site. This one, option A, and this is a 3-story retirement home. Let's see if I can point to, yes, right here, this part of the site here, with parking to the east. The top of the plan is Highway 15. This is Wellington Street here. So very similar to what we're currently proposing, a 3-story retirement home. This was an aerial view of this option. And there were 5 2-story townhouses along Wellington Street. So that was one option that was presented. And there was a second option which was presented, which was similar, the difference being that the parking was located on the west side of the site. And there were 6 townhouses. So again, 3 stories. There was some talk that the very north part, that it would be possible because of the slope of the land to put this partly into the ground, so it would be more like 2.5 stories. And this particular option had a flat roof. The previous one had a pitched roof. So based on those discussions, Rod and his group believed that there was support for the general project, and they went forward and purchased the land. Also, there was, at that meeting, a general consensus that it would be better to locate the parking to the east or behind the development. In other words, option A. And so in subsequent developments, after we became involved, that is the direction that was followed. The next stage, in September of this year, there was consultation with the village executive, also city planning and heritage staff. And then, so this was the project that was presented. Very similar, 3 full stories. It turned out to be not feasible because of the actual configuration of the site to dig the north part partly into the ground. Again, as had been requested, the parking lot is located to the east or to the back of the building. Sorry, I'm going to go back one. And at this time, September 25th, we had a pitched roof. And there was concern expressed at that time that the pitched roof, obviously because of the size of the building, would add height to the entire project. So there was a preference to use a flat roof because of the overall height of the building would be less. It was felt to have less impact on the entire skyline of the village. Also, there was some concern expressed about the scale of the 4 townhouses, and the discussion was that it would be better to combine those 4 townhouses into a single terrace house. So we made those changes, and this is the scheme that was presented to the Berryfield Village Association on October 16th, and it is what was sent to you for consultation. And after that Berryfield Village Association meeting on October 16th, there were a number of comments. To date, we've not started making any revisions based on those discussions. We wanted to wait until we had today's meeting and receive your feedback. And then all of that will be taken into account by the team. And then we'll make the actual application, make any adjustments that are appropriate. One of the things that was discussed is, of course, the view lines that are outlined in the Berryfield District Guidelines, and that is the view to the church. Our proposal is to move that viewpoint from the center line of the street to the corner of this part of the property here. And what's a unique thing about this project is the proposal to create a village green, and the ownership of that has not been worked out, but there's a commitment that there will be public access walking across that village green. So everyone will be able to walk across the site. And as you walk across the site, if I can indicate it here, as you walk across the site, you will get the view of the church will be revealed as you move across the site. So I think that's a real amenity for the village, for the city. A couple of other things is that by placing the row houses here along Wellington Street, the services which are required, the deliveries, et cetera, for the retirement home are screened from the street. You can see it here. And so that traffic is screened from the street. Also, with the parking lot located on the east side, it is not visible from the village green. So this is an aerial view from Highway 15, and you can see that the view through to the church is intact in here. This is an excerpt I'm sure you're all familiar with from the Berryfield Heritage District Conservation Plan, which shows the views. And the 2 views that we're talking about of the church are here at the corner at Wellington Street, and also at Wellington Street and Highway 15. So this one is a accommodated in the plan. And our proposal is to make an adjustment to this one, in part because the village green is accessible to everyone. In many developments, it would be quite possible this would be private property, and while you could view across it, you would not be able to walk across it. Whereas our development, as proposed, that part of the site would be available for everyone in the city to use. And you can see here, this is the view from the center of the street, and our proposed adjustment here. Our other thinking is that you're walking down the sidewalk, and that is your principal view, is walking from the sidewalk. So that was our view. So we presented that at the, here are the views that you have that gives you a sense of the scale of the project. 2-story townhouses or row houses and terrace, and 3-story. And following that meeting, October 16, there was a request to prepare a series of site sections, which is what this has, and these will be, they were developed after we made the submission to you for pre-consultation, and these will be part of the zoning application when we make it. You can see that with 3 stories, flat roof, it is well below the height of the tower, and the height of the proposed townhouses is very similar to the, 406 Wellingtons. So that is some additional information that was requested. Following the meeting, we did receive a letter from the Berryfield Village Association, which is confirming their comments. And we won't go through them in detail, but I will highlight a few of their comments. Appreciation for the extensive open space, the retention of the historic grid pattern, concerns about the proposed change to the views that are in the Heritage District Plan, and concern about the height and the massing of the building. So those are concerns that were expressed. And as I said before, once we receive feedback today, all of this will be taken into consideration, and we'll then complete the zoning application. We were also wanted to note that the Berryfield Village Association did note that it was a constructive discussion, and overall, the BVA is in favor of the development of this kind, obviously with additional consultation and development. That is kind of an overview. I'm happy to go back to any of the slides, or as you would like. And again, we have Rod here, who was part of the representing the owner, and who was part of that early consultation, who can also add additional information or answer any questions. So, thank you.
Thank you. So this is relatively informal process, the pre-consultation. So we'll start with a round of comments from members of the committee, if anyone has anything to say, and then we'll go to members of the public, and perhaps have another round of comments after that. Does anyone wish to speak? Jamie.
Hi there. I apologize in advance if this is probably repetitive, but it's a question about the intended demographic for the residents, right? I've heard the term nursing home, I've heard retirement, community. What does that mean? Is it private apartments? Is it assisted living? I want to know the purpose of the building.
It is a private development. It has a series of accommodation, and perhaps Rod could provide a bit more information.
Yeah, to be clear, nice to see you all, thank you. This is not a nursing home at all, not to be confused at all. This is a private retirement residence. There's quite a few in Kingston already. Many of you will know have visited many of the private retirement homes that you see around the city. We're actually building another one right now at Centennial and Princess. You might have seen it going up next to the Tim Hortons and Shoppers Drug Mart. It's about 7 stories now. Our construction and development person's here, Kirk, if you need to discuss that one as well and how you build these things. But it's definitely a private retirement home. There will be an aging in place in the building. The average age will be approximately 82, 83, 84. And it'll be a full-service facility. We have dining rooms and hair salons and activity areas and things like this. It'll be integrated with the village as much as we can, so we have village people coming into our building and coming to the pub with us and enjoying our building with us. It'll be part of the community. We see that the residents will be part of the village life. Obviously, when you have a village, it's not just buildings, it's people. And families and seniors are a nice asset to that. So it was very important on this project that we really get the participation and the feedback and the input and the support of the community. One of the things we did first was to meet with the community with, I think Christine's here, Christine Simnowich, and helped us with the process and to be sure that we were on the right track. We're going to donate about 40% of the land back to the village or to the city to keep it as a green space for everyone, which will be wonderful. So that was really, really important to us. And so we proceeded on based on their support. We didn't own the land at that time. At that time, it was owned by another developer who was quite adversarial with the village. And we said, no, we're not going to do that. And we had a public meeting at the church, and we said to the church members and the members of the village, if you don't want us to come here, that's okay. We have another building we're doing in Kingston, and that's okay. We don't need to move ahead in this project. But they had a kind of a vote about it, and they said, yes, we would enjoy you coming. Clearly, we have some issues we have to work through with you in terms of height, scaling, massing, those things. But if we can get through those, that'll be great. But clearly, yes, this is a private retirement home, full-service facility, for seniors of Kingston have an average age of about 82, 83, but not a government nursing home. A government nursing home will be 3 times the size, 3 times the staff, and extremely busy. You don't want a public nursing home on the site. Trust me.
Thank you. Next, I saw Sherman.
Maybe I could just add one other thing. The townhouses here along Wellington, they are part of the development, and they are independent living. So people that rent those townhouses, which are fully accessible, will have the ability to use some of the programs and perhaps purchase some of the meals that are in the retirement home. But they have their own entrance, their own parking, their own accessible entrance. There are 2 stories, but there are elevators that would provide individual access to the 2nd floor. So that's...
Thank you. I just wanted to remind everyone here that we really should keep our minds focused on the heritage aspects, the compatibility with the district plan. That's what the Heritage Committee does. It's great to have the context for what type of development it is and what are the details of it, but really our interaction should be limited in focus because there'll be other forums for, council will be, for example, will be looking at all the aspects. We wouldn't be able to offer council any comments based on the various services that are being provided and that kind of thing because it's not relevant to the Heritage District Plan. Anyways, Sherman?
Thank you. I'd just like to acknowledge and commend the conceptual development and the actual use of the site and the sightline consideration and the offer through. I agree with relocating the sightline and providing a better actually access across the property to continue to the church. I just overall think it's a great composition for that site and would be very supportive of such a development.
Thank you, Sherman. Catherine is next, and then Mac.
One of my questions was actually answered in regard to the independent living units. But my other question is really about the number of parking spaces and number of residents that's anticipated.
Yes, so that would obviously be part of the planning application. There are 145 units, plus the 16 living units independent in the townhouses. And the parking is at the same percentage that's currently in some of the other retirement home developments in the city. So it's approximately 60%, and don't quote me, I don't have the exact number in here, but it's approximately that. So it's consistent with other projects that have been approved of this type. Obviously, many of the people, as they reach higher levels of care, no longer drive, so you don't need the same amount of parking that you would in an apartment building.
Yeah, and just keep in mind, like what I said earlier, some things will be part of the planning application, not the heritage permit. So try to keep focus to the things that are in the district plan and the elements of the project that interact with the district plan. Next, I had Mac.
I start by reflecting Sherman's comments about the approach and the open space and so forth. I think it's a very good start. Two questions really. I know you're trying to save height by going to the flat roofs, but that one drawing earlier back that had the gable roofs on, I kind of feels a little warmer. I mean, it doesn't look quite as institutional as the flat roofs. That's one question.
Right. I mean, if I comment on that, we looked at both options. We're open to both options. Obviously, when you put a pitched roof on a building of this scale, it's going to be quite high.
It's higher, yeah.
So, but either is possible, and we looked at both options, and really we're looking at the flat roof now based on the feedback that we received from the Berryfield Village Association, but we're certainly willing to reconsider that or do some combination. I mean, those are all certainly possible.
And what kind of finish were you planning for the larger building? In terms of the what type of exterior finish were you proposing for the large building?
We haven't got to that level of detail yet. I mean, at this point, it's a zoning application, and the Signature Living Group only wants to look at it as the massing and the height of it, and we have not looked at materials. Obviously, if zoning approval is granted, before we would come back with an application here, we would have to work out materials, and there is certainly guidance in the plan or the district guidelines on what kind of materials to be used. So I would expect we would be using materials that are consistent with that, but we have not looked at that yet. It's really not a building design, it's just simply a kind of massing study.
Well, my next question was what kind of finish we were thinking about doing in the townhouses, so I guess that's the same answer then. That'll be coming in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think what these do indicate, I think, is the idea of breaking the mass down into components, so that it's not one large block, but several smaller pieces as a way of, breaking the scale of the whole project down.
And I think clearly, the townhouses are more important in terms of how they tie into the community than the other buildings up and behind. Clearly, and they're obviously more to scale of what else is there.
Right, and of course the townhouses have pitched roofs. The townhouses do have pitched roofs. The flat roof is only on the retirement home itself.
So now I saw Liz, and then Peter, and then Patricia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We just did a Berryfield designation update, and we went through a long, very critical process, and we have a plan that basically calls for single-family homes and detached homes. So I'd like to know, as a citizen of Kingston, not of Berryfield, but as someone who, this is part of the city and is a heritage conservation district. I gather you're having a heritage impact statement done now. You haven't had one done up to this point?
We haven't done one. Marcus Letourneau is part of the team, and he will be doing one once we finish the consultation stage, and it will of course be part of the planning application.
Okay. When the owner purchased the property, was there consideration given to following the plan for the district for single-family and detached homes?
I'm going to let Rod speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, clearly, we were sensitive to the heritage issues on this side. There's no question about it. That's why we took it on with some trepidation, in the sense of that's why we went to the community and talked to Christine and Alicia and Barry Gordon and other people, and then many other people in the village. Some of them who are very, very knowledgeable people, a few who are architects, and said, you know, can you help us with this? This makes sense. You know, the heritage issues, what do we need to be considerate of? We met with the city also, the city planners. I think Ryan was there, I think, at the original meeting. Ryan, if I apologize if you weren't, I think you were there. And so we were taking guidance from the city on the heritage. We, of course, were not up to speed on the actual heritage issues, except on a general basis. We read the guidelines. And so we were very sensitive to them and understand that we have to be observant of them and work with them as best we can. The next thing we did, which we thought was really important, to bring on Jerry Schultz. And Jerry is, as you know, he's probably well known to you as an architect in Kingston. And we were told, and I think that's quite right, that he's really good with heritage issues. He understands them and how to deliver them for the community. So we weren't, you know, really, really cognizant about the issue, but we were taking input from the people who we were meeting in the process and getting their advice and counsel through the process. And that's how we proceeded, yeah.
Thank you. I must admit I'm flummoxed because there was a plan for a subdivision by a previous owner or an apartment building, and the apartment building similar to that was turned down flat by the community as not being a heritage sympathetic building for Berryfield. So it does bring up the idea of the City of Kingston as opposed to the Berryfield Village Association and public engagement and when we decide things. But whatever happens to this property will be forever for the City of Kingston. And currently it's a village with a historic designation. If this goes forward, it becomes partly a village and partly a very large retirement home that actually, from my now intimate knowledge of retirement homes, could become an apartment building if the demographics change through rezoning. So it does show basically official plan amendments, zoning bylaw amendments, site plan control. So zoning bylaw amendments means this building probably doesn't actually fit the zoning bylaws currently in place. But this is right now an educational zoning, so the change would be dramatic. So one other question, well, two. One is about the parkland dedication. In our report, it really doesn't say that there's been a heavy discussion about the parkland dedication, and just now the owner said, was it 60% of the site would become a parkland dedication to the city?
40%.
40?
And that is the open green space. The actual details of how that works are still to be worked out, whether it's dedication to the city or whether there's an agreement to use the land. It will be available, but the details of how that actually works, I don't know the answer to that. Has not been worked out. It's been discussed in principle. It's been consistent all along to the plans that Rod and his group has presented, and what we've done since we've been on board is that is open space that people can use. The details of how that actually works are still to be worked out.
Yes, I'm sure it would, because of course, if you're dedicating a large amount of land, donating it to the city, in effect, who looks after it? Who creates the park? Who looks after it?
So all of those things need to be worked out.
And a small technical question is to do with sidewalks. There's a sidewalk will be required along the street frontage of this property for the proposed development. There aren't any sidewalks in the area. Is there a sidewalk plan for Berryfield? Because I understand there's been quite a back and forth about the width of the sidewalks, in that the original sidewalks are very narrow, but our standard of today means they have to be accessible. So would there be a problem even with sidewalks?
There's certainly no problem fitting a sidewalk onto this project. We're showing one on the plans, right adjacent to the edge of Wellington. The actual size and design of that, of course, is a site plan issue, but it is located on our, we've taken that into account. Sorry here. Jumped around here. What have we done here? F5. Okay. F5, there we go. So you can see it in the, along Wellington Street, and then there's a bit of a green space, and this is a sloping site, and each of the units in the terrace would need accessibility, full barrier-free accessibility, and so we have to accommodate that, but that's outside of the sidewalk. So certainly expect there to be a sidewalk. The details would, of course, come at the site plan stage.
Thanks. I do understand what we as a city require as a sidewalk. Berryfield District Village Association, in many discussions, prefer a narrow sidewalk. City of Kingston wants an accessible sidewalk. So the sidewalks are the same in Berryfield as they have been.
Right.
They're very narrow because there's no.
I mean, we would do whatever
is required.
I mean, you know, if we want a narrow sidewalk to fit with the other ones in the village, we're certainly open to that.
Well, there's the argument, as you can see.
You know.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, we'll keep moving. Peter, you're next.
Thank you. I was going to ask about the question of the park, and the answer at the moment is understandable, that it's up for discussion. There's one of the aspects, though, that interested me about it, which you haven't mentioned. If 40% of the site is going to be dedicated to park, whether it's private or public, of course, is a very important question. But the implication from the drawings that you've given us is that the park will extend from Wellington Street to the property of the church, and will make it that whoever owns it, that it will be accessible, that, in other words, access to the St. Mark's Church will be accessible from Wellington Street, which it hasn't been. Is that correct?
That is correct. There is a section of land that is owned by the church, and that there's an informal paths that go through there now. Our intention is to connect to those in whatever way works best for the church. But yes, it would be fully accessible from Wellington Street to our property line, and from there we would hope the church would extend, and we would work with them to do that.
The other question I have has to do with the concern that the three-story building, if it's built, is going to overshadow things. Anyone who walks along Main Street knows that the property rises from Main Street in that direction. And my question is, if you're a pedestrian on Main Street, and with the distance back from Main Street, that the building where you propose to build it, what will the sight lines be? What proportion or at what height will you see the proposed building if it's built as you have suggested possible?
We'll prepare those views for when we come back to your committee. Certainly when you're standing in front of any of the houses on Main Street, you won't see it. There may be places in between the houses where you can see bits and pieces of it. It's at the very eastern part of the property after the hill rises, so it has minimal impact, but we would need to work through those details. We've placed it on a site in a way that would minimize the height impact. I should also add that, of course, there is a minimum program of accommodation that Signature Living needs for this project to work, a certain number of units of a certain type and size, and we're limited on what area of the site we can work to, because in part for the desire to create this open space. And there are also a need to have everyone live in their unit as close as they can to the central facilities on the ground floor, all of which dictate a 3-story building. So this project would not work as 2 stories. It does need to be 3 stories. And then our task, of course, is to work that design in a way that is compatible with the overall massing of the village, which we're working on.
Okay, next on my list is Patricia.
A question and a comment. The question is actually for the committee, but my comment is for the plan you have there. I realize what you're saying is you haven't, you're not at the point of considering the outside, the facade of the building.
Right.
And but as I'm thinking of it, like right now, that picture up there, it looks very block-like. And I think the point about having a pitched roof does make it look more sympathetic with the other historic buildings within the community. Some height is sacrificed, but I think a lot of how that building fits into the community or the village will depend on what choices are made in terms of the facade. And the church is adjacent to the building. It seems it provides cues as to how a design might be done so that it is sympathetic to a particular period, historic period, but with a contemporary interpretation. The other thing is it's a very large village green, and I'm thinking that at some point when you do get to it, that maybe some heritage planting or heritage landscape design might be appropriate for a village green. Anyway, those are my comments.
Yes, thank you for those comments. As I said before, we did look at a pitched roof, and that's still something we would be happy to relook at when we get to the point where we're designing real buildings or detailed buildings. And same thing, that village green is a concept. There's no detailed landscape design. We don't imagine it as one large green field. We, of course, have to consider the views, but there would be a landscape design as part of the site plan and heritage applications.
Sound is at maximum. All people can do is talk into their mics. We've gone around once, except Dawn and Megan. So, Dawn, I see your hand.
Yes, excuse me. I think there are sort of concerns from heritage qualities of the district about the massing, the height, and the sight lines, and so I'd like to just focus on those. One of them is the sight line of the church from Wellington Street, which is mentioned quite, definitely in the village plan and so on. I think there's a diagram that actually shows.
I'll put that up, Don, right there. That's the one you're referring to?
No, I'd like the one that actually shows your buildings.
Oh, okay, sure. I'll go back here. That one?
Well, that's okay. The one on page 49 of our agenda is even better, but...
All right, can you hold it up for me? All right. That one? Oh, that one, okay. That one, this one right here. That's the one.
Yeah, yes, that's closest. Okay, you're obviously aware of the requirement to keep the, try to maintain the visibility of the church, because the church is an important part of the village. And what you've shown there and what you can see on page 49 of the agenda is the sight line from the corner of the property to the church. And what you can see, what it means is that there's one point on Wellington Street where you can see the church tower, but you can't see the church, the body of it, the church itself, only the tower. And you can only see that much from a very narrow, a few feet along Wellington Street. So to me, I don't think that's adequate. And I understand you've already heard this point, and you're making some changes to improve it. But to me, it seems strange that you would put such a large massing of the retirement home right in front, or at least right south of the church, because that is really going to block the view. And on the other hand, you have space in the along the towards Main Street, I guess the northwest corner of this property. You could put some buildings there, and that would not block the view from Wellington Street. I mean, everybody in the village comes in and out, well, in at any rate, on Wellington Street. And what they're going to see in future is not the church. They're not going to get a glimpse of the church, or scarcely a glimpse of the church. They're going to see this development. So that's a concern to me, and I hope you can sort of consider rearranging the massing somewhat. The other major point is that height is important. We've been talking about 3 stories, and that's supposed to be okay in the village, but it turns out 3 stories means I think 18 meters. That's a very high building for a 3-story building.
That, as I mentioned before, if you put a pitched roof on the building, it's quite high. So that number is in place in our draft to account for the height of a pitched roof on the building. If it were a flat roof, it would be lower. So that's the sort of design, urban design issues that we have to work through. That's where that number comes from.
Yeah, okay, I understand that. It's a fair point. I would say that, I can't solve that particular problem for you, but what I would be concerned that you part of the height, part of the required height has to do with the design of rooms. I mean, are they going to have 12-foot ceilings or something like that? That there's some flexibility in there. So what I'm suggesting is that, to me, it's important that the height be kept down as far as one can, and going to a flat roof can help the process, but not if you then put all the mechanical machinery on top of that, because that's not very attractive either. So again, these are my concerns. I think in my mind the design has still quite a ways to go before certainly I feel comfortable with it.
Thank you, Don. Anyone else that hasn't spoken in the first round? Yes, Megan.
More comments, not necessarily questions, but I really, like Councillor Schell, I'm very surprised that this is the direction that we're heading. And I personally can't reconcile the massing in the village. It just doesn't make sense to me. And it sounds like, well, we're at an impasse, because if the project can't proceed unless it's 3 stories, it doesn't make sense to me based on what we had spoken about months ago. So that's my first comment. But the second piece is to be aware with this type of development is what will happen to the periphery. And I know we spoke about sidewalks, but there will also be all kinds of related signage that won't necessarily be compatible with a heritage district. So I think we need to be cognizant of that as we're going through the process as well.
Thank you. It's been some excellent participation. I guess I'll take my turn. I'll try to keep my comments short. I guess, Mr. Vice Chair, if you could just take the chair.
Yes, I recognize you.
Okay, so speaking just as a member of the Heritage Committee, just thinking about the challenges. So first of all, it's clear any development on this site of this scope was always going to be a challenge. And I commend the applicants for their flexibility they've shown so far, for going really out of their way to meet with the Village Association and the city, and for coming here today and listening to all of our comments. This is all true consultation. I believe it's in good faith. Very positive. These are all positives. The question, what can be built here is the question, and the answer we're getting from the applicant is a 3-story retirement residence and then some more or less compatible housing on the streetscape, which I agree with Mac completely. That's the primary impact on the village, is what's in the row of housing on the street there, and not the main building. But that being said, the big massing of an apartment building in a heritage village is literally the elephant in the room. I mean, you can't really ever reconcile a 3-story apartment building with the Berryfield district plan as it's written. It's incompatible. That doesn't mean it's a deal breaker necessarily, because council has the final say. And at council, I might have different things to say, because I was speaking as a city councillor with all the planning aspects in mind as well. But as for the heritage aspects of this, the 3-story apartment building will never be compatible with the Berryfield district plan, and then so perhaps your approach has been correct in trying to get as much other positive things into the application so that everybody will sort of concede that and get approval that way. I certainly don't think it's impossible to maximize the benefits of the design. To get to Dawn's points about the north, I think it's the north wing there, on the left of the screen, that's the north wing, right?
Yes, closest to the church?
Yeah.
Is that what you're referring to? Yes.
Yeah, so that one, to me, if you're going to parse up the building itself, is by far the most problematic part of the current layout, for the reasons Dawn mentioned, but also proximity to the church and the sightline. And obviously it's accommodating the parking lot. In Don's suggestion, he put the parking on the other side of the building to accommodate the sightline. I actually think if you have to choose between those two, the parking's better on this side of the building, because the village green next to the parking, although it preserves the sightlines, it degrades the quality of the green itself, of the parkland itself. So that's the compromise that you would have if you put the parking on the other side of the building. So therefore, if the parking has to be there and has to be of a certain size, and as we've heard, it's not a very large size compared to the number of residents, it still probably has a certain size it has to be. And then the challenge is, where do you put it? If you move the north wing, or you turn it, or to allow for the sight line, where do you put the parking? So that's the challenge, and I don't know the answer, but if there's any way that north wing can be moved further from the church in a configuration that opens up the sight line a little more, it definitely would be a positive. I don't know whether you've considered those in your options. Splitting up the parking into two sections with the north wing attached to the middle of the main building, which I assume where the dining hall and everything will be. It wouldn't be inconvenient for the residents. You'd have some parking on the church side and some parking in between the two wings, perhaps. I don't know if that's an option. But those are the kinds of things I would look at if I were you, and continue to, I would advise you, friendly advice, continue to reach out to various agents involved here to find some kind of consensus that will allow for this oversized building to be accepted. It is a positive that the Berryfield Village Association seems to be okay to consider it. And I think it's mostly because of the type of resident that they're looking at, and then they don't see that type of resident as incompatible with the village, which is a positive as well. So I think I've covered all the things I'd like to say today, and I know that this is an ongoing process, and good luck with it.
Return the chair.
Okay, so now we'll go to members of the public, and then if members of the committee have more things to add, we can have a final say after that. So who would like to speak?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the team for the presentation and the report. I did follow the earlier plan on this. I think this is much better. Seeing a lot of things I like. I like the village green concept. My main suggestion to deal with some of the discussion that's come up so far, the chair and the vice chair were talking about sight lines and parking. There's a project that was done on Johnson Street. It actually went to an OMB, and then it won, and it's now been constructed. Where what they did was they broke up the massing into 3 distinct sections, and they buried the parking. So that's my suggestion here, to sort of reorient the massing to the east side, and then put the parking under it, and you have it broken up into 3 sections, or 4, or sort of based on the shape of what. I'm sure you know the project, as Alexander Wilson designed it. So you're getting more out of the land that you have there. You're going to be addressing the issues with sight lines, and maybe you're moving the pieces around a little bit better as well. Now, I don't want to get too much into planning questions because the chair has stated that that's not really what we're talking about today, but I do want to I'll put all my comments in. Some of them are more planning related, but I'll stick to the heritage parts here. I think we have something special with Berryfield. We have a village that's over 200 years old. We have an authentic environment, a heritage conservation district. And my question that I'm heading to has to do with the 161 units that you want to put in as to how it compares to the number of houses that are in Berryfield now. Right? You've got that's been there for over 200 years. It's turned into a kind of a Tony neighborhood in the city. It's a real heritage asset. It's a tourist attraction in a lot of ways. But if you're going to be putting in 161 units, is that equal to the population of Berryfield now, or is it 40% of it, or whatever? I think that's a question that has got to be answered in some detail. So I'd appreciate that being looked at.
Just to remind you what I said earlier, Frank, about the planning aspects being separate from the heritage aspects. So think about the heritage plan. Yeah,
I'm going to actually limit it to that then. Other things have been said, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to write it up and I'll put it in as a letter to the committee, and I'll have my planning aspects there, and then they can be sorted later. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dixon. Anyone else from the public wish to speak? Please come forward to a microphone. That one's still on.
Hello, I'm Christine Sipnowicz. I live in Berryfield Village. I used to serve on this committee, and I'm president of the Berryfield Village Association. Well, I want to say, first of all, I'm really grateful to the Heritage Committee, to Heritage Kingston, for looking at this so closely and caring about the heritage of the village. That means a lot, and I'm glad you're being so vigilant. I'm also grateful, and we all in the village have been very grateful to Rod Wilson and his team for being so consultative with us. And that was quite a contrast, as you may remember, with the person who owned it previously, or who was adversarial and indeed, made us very worried about the future of that site and what would happen to it. You may recall that in that instance, the proposal was either an apartment building, a high-ish apartment building, or a subdivision. And I guess we face a real challenge in terms of thinking about what kind of project can be put in that site in a way that's compatible with the heritage of the village. A subdivision worries us because we fear that means many battles over individual houses and the net effect of a very modern, dominating set of residences. So one advantage of an institutional building such as this one, which would be analogous to the school that preceded it, is that it kind of contains this new intrusion into one site, and doesn't entertain the idea that there's no longer a village. There's now some old houses plus a new subdivision. So I think that was why we were receptive to the retirement residence proposal. Now, we do have concerns, and as the proposals developed, we've been disappointed by the loss of the sight lines, the massing, and the height, which I think originally we didn't anticipate would be as you have before you. It's difficult for us, of course, from our point of view, to understand the bottom line of the proponent, what is or is not financially viable. But from our point of view, we would very much hope that the input that we've provided, which is detailed on the letter that you have, is heeded, and that the retirement residence can be modified in ways that preserve the sight lines, that make it not so massive, and do something about the height as well. But I certainly understand that the Heritage Conservation District Plan sets out, individual family-style residences, houses, not institutional buildings. But I think we thought that the Horton site presented special challenges that meant a proposal of this kind, and I'm speaking very generally, not the specifics, was theoretically the best way of dealing with the heritage integrity of the village as a whole. And again, thank you to everyone for thinking about this so carefully.
Thank you. Any other members of the public? As you know, we take all comments from members of the public as a group, and then the applicant has a chance to address any concerns. Please, just state turn your microphone on, state your name.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity. Just a few remarks.
You have to introduce yourself.
I will
for the
introduce
record.
myself, absolutely. I'm Pierre Dupre. I'm an architectural historian, also a resident in Barriefield, and I've been following the process. And like previous speakers, I commend the group and the architect for having given as much consideration as they had. The BVA did have a meeting, as has been referred to, in the middle of October, and things haven't progressed too much beyond that point, except insofar as the requested sectional views through the entire property to contextualize the proposed new buildings with respect to the village as a whole and the topography of the village. Those are new, and those are interesting to see, and we'll want to study those in more detail. A little bit hard to see up here on the screen, but hopefully those will be circulated so that we'll have the advantage of those. I'd just like to come back to the prime concern here, which is obviously the heritage implications of this, Mr. Chair, as you've mentioned on several occasions. And to point out that recently, as one of the members of the committee mentioned, there was a lengthy and at times drawn out, one might say, discussion in terms of the updating of the Heritage Conservation District Plan. And one of the things that I think Barriefielders felt particularly happy about having, as it were, pushed through at the time of those discussions was the valuing of sight lines within the village as opposed to those on the periphery of the village. The previous plan had made lots of mention of looking at the church tower and the general skyline of the village from the distance from Route 15 as it passes by, but a number of us pointed out that, there were the residents of the village themselves to be considered when one walks down or drives down Wellington Street, to have these vistas that we've enjoyed of the church tower, which are heritage views. I mean, the old photographs from the 19th century and early 20th century make quite clear that the space all around the church to the south of it was completely open, so one had these views. There were no buildings there. There were various reasons for that. In part originally motivated by concerns, one might say ballistic concerns. This was a field of fire as it was originally intended. But we were happy that those viewpoints were within the village to be preserved. And that particularly, as we see on the aerial view above us, at the corner of Wellington and Drummond. And that was very important. I think that was agreed to and felt to be, by everybody, an improvement. The present plan, obviously, as you've seen by looking at the two dots on the screens here, you can see that that sight line has been moved significantly, not, I don't know how many meters that is, but significantly to the west, shifting the whole perspective and therefore making it possible, Mr. Chair, to allow for that northern wing that you drew attention to be built in the position that it is. Now, the point of view was raised that this clearly is a change to the update. The point of the vista was strictly defined as being roughly at the midpoint where Drummond Street meets the Wellington Street coming down from the east-west street. So that, I think, is really something that everybody should look at on this committee quite carefully, because it's easy in perspective drawings and things of these natures to somewhat, should we say, obscure any kind of encroachment of this nature. But I think that encroachment will occur. And the very thing that we, and the committee as a whole, and everybody engaged in this process, arrived at through consensus will be, to some extent, undermined. There is also the discussion here, the point was made that, this will be a path that will lead into the space, but you really won't be able, as one of your members pointed out, you will not be able to see that vista until you actually go up into the green space. You won't be able to see the church under the present circumstances, because it will be, to a large extent, the tower and the church building itself will be obscured by the northern wing that encroaches, I think that's the best word, encroaches upon that heritage viewpoint, which is the thing that was, to some extent, fought for by the Barriefield Village Association and was agreed to in the update for the for the Historic District Plan. The other point that becomes clear, if you look at the drawings, these aerial views, is that the driveway, and this was a point made at the meeting, it hasn't been referred to here, I'm talking about the BVA meeting in October, that the driveway coming out as it does and linking up with Drummond Street could potentially, this is a point made by a number of the residents, could potentially then direct traffic, all vehicular traffic, particularly truck traffic, to take all kinds of shortcuts through the village, because obviously, in this case, pulling out of that driveway where the two sightline points are indicated would line up directly with Drummond Street. And a number of the residents on Drummond Street said, well, people are taking shortcuts through the village as it is. This will encourage truck traffic and other vehicular traffic to start turning down through the heritage village. This is certainly a concern, as is drainage. And also the point that's been made in the letter of the BBA on the last page of your report here regarding, as we see from the drawings as they exist at present, we understand that there's lots of modification possible there, that there's going to be a potentially considerable light pollution from a building that is, it would appear from the very provisional views that we see, to be, as the word has been used here, I will use it again, rather institutional in look, which is to say, not necessarily a glass box, but something perhaps approximating that. And I think that the height restrictions, which seems to be one of the big concerns here, that is to say the density, the number of people included in this building, as our chair of the BVA has just said, that should be revisited. Everything is predicated upon that, the number of people that need to be fitted into this lot, requiring these considerable heights. Clearly, from my point of view, at any rate, pitched roofs would be something to be considered here. Many of the residential communities that I've seen, Fox Run just outside Gananoque, to take an example in point, and perhaps some of the ones that Signature has been involved in themselves, have used pitched roofs. So I think this needs to be, the density needs to be revisited in order to achieve the right kind of balance here. I think balance is what we are looking for. I think the BVA certainly is open to further discussions on the matter, and I hope those discussions will take place because, as one of the previous interlocutors just said, this is really a gem, this village, the open space, the amount of open space with respect to the habitations, the height restrictions, all of these heritage characteristics are on a knife edge that could be very easily flipped over. And that's something I think we should avoid for the sake of the Heritage Conservation District Plan, which we went to a great deal of effort, all of us collectively, to establish. So I think these things need to be revisited. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other members of the public wish to speak? Okay. I guess at this point, it's pre-consultation. I think we've covered most of the points. If there's any new aspects that anyone, heritage aspects that anyone can think of, I'll allow it. Otherwise, I think we should move on. Yes, Catherine.
Thank you. This relates to the townhouses that would face onto Wellington Street. There are no terraces in Barryfield. I mean, and it's more of an urban than a rural kind of development. And also, there's a uniformity to townhouses that I think is quite alien to a heritage village. And so I'm just questioning, I guess, whether the idea to go to terrace is necessarily a plus, because if one went back to more individual type of residences, then it would be much more possible to have those buildings less uniform and therefore more in keeping with the village as it stands, where every house is essentially different from its neighbor.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Councillor Schell.
Thank you. This is partly in response to some of the comments that have just been made, and almost one of them is careful what you wish for. We created a very detailed, very strict, very consultative, very at times contentious, thought out Barryfield Heritage District Plan. And this council endorsed it. Mr. Dupre mentioned ballistic concerns, and yes, that's what it was like getting this district plan together. Ballistic was a good word. And the comment that this project would undermine the district plan, looking at it just as a view, if that all became parkland that was guaranteed parkland, because of course developers can then sometimes, if it's not owned by the city, you know, maybe put another row bunched up against the houses on the hill. So I am really concerned that this is even sort of being considered as a go forward, and I hadn't even thought of the Drummond Street intersection, because we have talked in the plan about the rural atmosphere of the village, that it's sort of a quiet area where people can live and walk, and as I say, I know these places. My mother's in one, and at 161 units, there will be at least one car per unit. By the time you've got your personal service care workers, visitors, because tons of us visit our relatives all the time. There's a lot of staff that come and go. The cooking staff often come, two times a day. There's big trucks delivering food. It is an institutional type of building, as opposed to an apartment building where it would be, again, if it was 161, you'd have people going to and from work. So this actual Drummond Street intersection, which I hadn't noted, I would be one that was using it, because I know I could pop down the hill and get onto Highway 2 to get home. So there are masses, to my mind, of problems with this. And realistically, that whole development should come out of the Berryfield plan if it moves forward, because it's certainly not compatible with the plan as it stands. And the notion that a subdivision, I can't remember how many there were. The problem with this, partly with the subdivision, was there were going to be more new houses than old in Berryfield. From what I can tell, it's the Village Green that has attracted the Berryfield Village Association, and I can understand that, but this really doesn't go with the district plan. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other final constructive comments? Yes, Sherman.
Consider appropriate use and appropriate change, and I'd like all of our thoughts to be to go towards what's the appropriate development, what's the appropriate evolution of this site, and the appropriate has to take into consideration all aspects that enable it and disable it. And the church is present. Like for me, I look at the history and I see the church, and the church there disabled the military to create a site. I don't want it to disable the appropriate development of this site and the appropriate evolution of the use of the village. Not to stagnate the use, but to actually to inspire the evolution of community in this village. The potential of that is what I see. I see the evolution of the way we change and how we use space. This supports that. How we use space in the beginning of this village was different than how we use space now, and I don't want it to stagnate the evolution of this village and the evolution of the use of this space. We have to take into consideration who we are as changing individuals and community members on how we use spaces and what we require of those spaces of community or in community. I just had this vision, trucks coming out of that intersection at Drummond Street. They're going to change my view of the church, because there's trucks coming in or whatever it is coming in, just traffic coming in. So wouldn't I rather step aside and meander through a park and explore my changing approach, my new vista of the church through this parkland? Maybe the point of view that was created is inappropriate in as much as it's at the intersection now of a vibrant location, whereas it was at the intersection of a stagnant location before. So I think we have to keep in mind the evolution of how we are using and enabling this site and what's appropriate. And I believe the Heritage Conservation District Plan can be used to guide appropriate development.
Well said. And I see Jamie's hand. I'm going to allow one comment per member at this point, and then I'm going to close discussion.
Basically, I just want to echo all the concerns that have been made here today, and in particular, the issue of density. I just think Berryfield is a unique heritage community, and we can't dislocate the notion of density from heritage conservation or preservation in this case. So just a point to consider.
Thank you. Well, that was a great discussion. Thank you so much for coming to us today. And I know you've got some things to ponder, and we'll be seeing you again. So thanks for coming, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you very much. And we will, as we develop the plans, take all of this into consideration. Thank you.
I'm going to call a 3-minute recess, so for a bathroom break and things like that. And we'll be right back. I came back to my seat and I found the clerk has left me a present. Hopefully I won't need it. We're near the end of the agenda. We have another pre-consultation application for 305, 323 Rideau Street, the Bailey Broom. If you're here for that and that only, thank you very much for your patience through the preceding pre-consultation. See, staff is ready to present. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So before I turn it over to the owner and his agent, I'll just quickly set the stage. This property is at 305, 323 Rideau Street. It's the Bailey Broom Factory. The property is at the corner of Rideau and Cataraqui Streets. It's an L-shaped former industrial building. The property is designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act, and it's subject to terms of an easement agreement. The property was acquired by the city through tax arrears, subsequently sold to the owner in 2016. Through the agreement of purchase and sale with the city, the owner is required to restore the existing heritage building prior to commencing with future development of the site. So the owner is here today and would like to restore and adaptively reuse this building for office space, meeting space, and a proposed cafe. And I will leave it again to the applicant to provide an overview of the details of that. I would note that this is a future phase is also proposed on this property for 9 residential townhouse units along Rideau Street, which is not before us today, but will need to come back at some point for heritage approval. And again, similar to the last one, detailed designs of the proposal have not been finalized. The applicants have requested a pre-consultation meeting with this committee to gain prior comments before advancing this through a full heritage application. And as part of that, we do circulate this to agencies internally, and their comments are summarized in your agenda package. I would note through the keen eyes of one of our members that there was a omission in the designation bylaw on the end of page 72 of your agenda package. The final attribute on that page should read the visibility and legibility of these attributes from Rideau and Cataraqui Streets, including the facade of the Rideau Street concrete structure. So that matter is being addressed internally, but just so you're aware of that. This application was circulated to Heritage Committee members, and your comments are included in the agenda as well. So I will pass this off to the applicant, who will walk you through their designs.
Okay. Can everybody hear me clearly? Okay. Thanks, Ryan, for that introduction. Good morning. I'm Alex Rose Thompson, and I'm a heritage planner with ERA Architects here in Kingston. I've also got John Dronimus of Raw Design with me this morning, and he'll join me following the presentation for the discussion portion. So I'm here to present an overview of Raw's proposal to restore and rehabilitate the former Bailey Broom factory buildings. The goal this morning is really to present the proposal and to receive as much of your constructive feedback as possible so that we can finalize our proposal and submit our applications. So the Bailey Broom site, as I'm sure most of you are aware, is located approximately 1 kilometer north of Kingston's downtown, just west of the river. It forms part of a post-industrial landscape and is clustered with several other late 19th and early 20th century industrial buildings, including the former National Grocers Building and the Woolen Mill. So Raw Design was the only respondent to a request for information put out by the city to purchase and develop the site, and subsequently bought the site in 2016. The purchase and sale agreement did include, as Ryan mentioned, a condition requiring the owner to restore and complete the conservation work prior to developing anything on the vacant lands, which is the northern portion of the site. So the site is comprised of two parcels, separated as part of the purchase and sale agreement. So parcel 1 is the north portion of the site that's currently vacant, and the Bailey Broom factory buildings occupy the southern site. So the former factory is comprised of 3 very distinct parts. So we've got the original factory building of 1894, which runs along Cataraqui Street, the brick office addition of 1909 by W. Newlands, and the concrete wing extension, which runs along Rideau Street, that was built in 1911. So the Bailey Broom factory is indeed designated under Part 4 of the Ontario Heritage Act, and also has a heritage easement agreement with the city. So just to be clear, I'll make sure we're all clear. So that's the original factory building, the office addition on the corner, and the concrete wing along Rideau. So the property is designated for its architectural, historical, and contextual values. And I'm just going to quickly highlight the related heritage attributes, which are those physical elements that express the values. So the central office section, designed by William Newlands in a modest Queen Anne Revival style, which includes its symmetrical form and projecting and receding planes, the parapeted front elevation with a prominent dentiled cornice and pediment, the gabled roof, the projecting side hall entrance with corbelled piers and arch, the entrance door with glazed and fielded panels, the 3-sided bay with pyramidal roof and prominent cornice, the segmental arch door and window openings topped with brick voussoirs. We also have the brick construction and concrete and stone foundations of that office addition. The simple functional qualities of the brick wing along Cataraqui Street, including its brick construction, rhythmic bays marked by brick piers, and a random coarse stone foundation and a low slope gable roof. The visibility and legibility of its heritage attributes from Rideau Street and Cataraqui Street, and now including the facade of the Rideau Street structure. And lastly, its visual relationship to the other late 19th, early 20th century gross industrial buildings in the area that I mentioned before. So in May of 2017, this year, a condition assessment was carried out by ERA Architects, and the inspection focused on assessing the general condition and soundness of the building as it related to its heritage architecture. The building's been vacant for a long time, almost 25 years now, so this has led to varying conditions across the different buildings and their different component parts. In general, the 1909 office addition on the corner has fared the best, and it's generally in a very sound condition. The original factory building along Cataraqui Street is in varying states from very poor in areas to sound condition, and there are some significant areas of deterioration, notably on the north wall elevation. And the concrete wing along Rideau Street is the most heavily deteriorated, and unfortunately, it's in a very active state of collapse right now. There's some quite serious cracking on it. Ultimately, this condition assessment was very significant in terms of informing how we developed our overall design and the conservation approach, including where we'd focus our conservation efforts and where we would allow for a new layer of architectural quality. So the concept plan for the site is to develop in 2 phases. The first phase provides for the adaptive reuse of the Bailey Broom buildings to allow for Raw's office, co-working office, meeting rooms, and a cafe with parking. And the second phase will introduce the residential townhouses on the northern portion of the site. So I'm going to use the laser pointer for this so that we're clear. So the new program for the site will include, this is looking at a ground floor plan of the building. So Raw's office in the office addition on the corner, a cafe, and co-working offices, units, meeting rooms, all along the original factory building. And then partial demolition. So here's the original concrete extension, and you'll see that partial demolition is there to allow for circulation into the site, and also to allow for some bicycle parking and storage and waste facility storage. So the intent of the conservation approach is to maintain the property's identified heritage attributes while allowing for its adaptive reuse and strengthening its ongoing role as a visual gateway to the surrounding historic area. So in terms of our conservation approach for the buildings, we're including both restoration and rehabilitation. So the restoration component involves accurately representing the 1909 architecture and construction of the office addition on the corner. And then rehabilitation of the original factory will allow for a new contemporary compatible use. And lastly, the partial removal of the concrete wing allows for the new access and circulation and the storage for the waste and recycling. So we're using the term fragmentation here basically because it's a way of describing a process of selecting elements of a built heritage resource that together sufficiently express its value. So in the case of the concrete wing, which is heavily deteriorated, it's a way of commemorating and interpreting that resource once it's sort of gone past a reasonable level of repair. So it's been an iterative process where we've assessed the impacts of the proposal and the design on the cultural heritage value and attributes of the property, and then gone back to sort of mitigate where we could those impacts. So ultimately, the three largest impacts that do result from this project and relate to the condition assessment of the buildings are a new roof and a new constructed north wall on the original factory building, the enlargement of the window openings on the south wall of the factory building, and the partial demolition or fragmentation of the concrete wing. So I'm going to now go through some of the images and renders to sort of better help you understand those impacts. So looking at this image, we're looking northeast towards the office addition. So we're seeing the office addition restored to its 1909 design. And arguably, the office is probably the most interesting piece of architecture on the site. And its combination of the visual prominence it has in the corner and its sound condition that we found it in led it to be the focus of our restoration work. So the work on the building will include restoring the existing windows on the west, north, and south elevations, restoring the existing door entry on the west elevation, repairing, repointing the existing brickwork, restoring the original parapet, the provision of a new metal roof, and also we're investigating the possibility of revealing and repairing an original coffered ceiling in the interior. Actually, I'm going to go back to that one for a second. So the original factory building along Cataraqui Street varies in condition. So the south elevation is in the soundest condition, but unfortunately the north elevation and the roof are in a quite a bad condition at this point in time. So basically the rehabilitation program includes enlarging the window openings on the south elevation, which are the window openings along the road on Cataraqui Street, to put in new operable windows and doors. Now, I just want to use this as an example of where our design approach came out of the condition assessment in relation to the values and heritage attributes of the site. So obviously, we would like to bring more light into the building, both for office working spaces, the cafe, and having operable windows and doors is really important. But the condition assessment portion is that ultimately underneath each of the existing windows right now, there's quite a bit of decay of the brick. So the combination of wanting to bring in sunlight, wanting to have operable windows and doors, with the fact that underneath each of these windows, there's a portion of heavily deteriorated crumbling brick, led us to this approach of enlarging the windows on this elevation. So we're also going to have a new entry door within the existing door opening on the south elevation, a lot of repair and repointing of the brickwork. Also inserting a new door in the existing opening on the east elevation, but maintaining the concrete piers either side of the door, a new metal roof with solar panels on the south-facing slope. So in contrast, the concrete wing, which is in an active state of collapse, the goal here is really to retain the footprint for interpretive purposes so that people can understand the evolved history of this site. So this is going to include partial retention of the west, north, and east walls to approximately 950 millimeters, repair of the remaining concrete walls, capping with a continuous steel plate, and then it's essentially the installation of a pre-finished metal cladding to create external walls and roofs for the bicycle and storage and waste facilities. So here we are. This is a view that ultimately won't really be much of a view for the public, because I'm thinking this is also sort of looking from the to south where there's proposed to be some townhouses. But this view is really helpful in terms of trying to understand what that north wall will look like, which is a newly constructed wall. So basically, this is showing us the new north wall and the new roof on the original factory building. So this is where we've got a really bad condition wall, and this rehabilitation involves dismantling and rebuilding the actual wall and cladding it in the pre-finished medical vertical sheeting. We see this design as representing a really new and distinct layer of architecture to the building, and the vertical metal sheeting provides a very clear distinction between the old buildings, the new building, while being compatible with the industrial character and use of the site. So I'm going to wrap this up quickly. So basically, the design proposal before you has been informed by the overall cultural heritage value, the relative architectural value of the different building components and their condition, and this has been a real key challenge of working with a site that's been vacant for almost 25 years. We feel very strongly that this approach will conserve the heritage value and attributes of the property, but also allow for its ongoing use while enhancing the industrial and commercial character and strengthening what is a very evolving character in this neighborhood. So following the feedback today, we'll finalize our design and submit our planning applications and heritage permits. There'll be a statutory meeting this winter, and staff will subsequently bring back a report recommendation to the Heritage Committee. The goal really is to have our planning approvals for the first phase this spring and to really begin work, because we recognize these buildings have been vacant and they do continue to deteriorate and have vandalism, so we really want to start work on these buildings this spring. And following these approvals, we hope to bring forward the applications for the northern portion of the site. So I thank you very much for your time, and I'm going to welcome your feedback and welcome John up here to help answer any questions as both developer and architect. Thank you.
And thank you. Very exciting building, heritage building that's been empty for 25 years, and it looks like we're on the dawn of a new era for it. Who would like to not ask questions, go first in the first round of consultation? Mac.
I think it's very exciting as well. So I got a few questions. So the windows along the Cataraqui Street, are they all the same width as the existing openings, except for maybe the big one with the glass for the cafe? Is that right? That's wider than what is shown?
Yes, that's correct. And
the concrete building, you're just taking a chunk of it to basically a driveway through, and you're keeping the other end of it, or I mean, you're basically completely rebuilding those buildings, aren't you?
So, I mean, essentially, I'll start, maybe John can jump in, but...
Maybe move to the mic.
Oh, sorry, yeah. We're having to sort of look at that concrete wing a little bit as a ruin. So we haven't exactly, there's still some flexibility on how much of that cement base we retain. It's going to come down to what is feasible. Ultimately, it's being capped and sort of preserved, if you imagine almost like a low wall, and the actual metal structure that will form the enclosure to the bicycles is actually going to be built behind it, so it won't actually be bearing any weight on it. So that's, we have to, it's very old concrete, it probably doesn't have any rebar in it, so structurally it's really going to be a sort of preserved ruin. But I think you were sort of saying how much is really being taken down, and ultimately the portions that you see here, let's see if there's maybe this image. So where you're seeing that light color, that's the existing wall being preserved. And then basically a new screen, which again, we are still finalizing what that will look like, is basically the new enclosure for the storage waste and the bicycles.
And so you're proposing steel siding above that, are you? Is that what we're looking at?
I'm gonna let John, as architect, answer the details.
Yeah, that's a good question. We're proposing a pre-finished metal. It might be perforated. It's what you're looking at right now is a corrugated pre-finished metal. Concealed fasteners, something to be really simple and elegant, sitting on top of that existing concrete wall.
Yeah. I mean, from my perspective, I think the footprint's important. Saving that bit of concrete wall, from my perspective, isn't really all that important. But the north wall of the existing building, I can't quite clear. Obviously, it was brick originally, and you're saying that's really in bad shape, and you're rebuilding it. What is your proposed finish for that section? Is it brick again, or is it steel to match the building you're doing here?
There we go.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, that view, yes.
Yeah, the proposal is for all of the new wall material to be clad in the same profile of a metal cladding. Whether it's perforated or not, again, is still being sort of explored. But we like the idea of one simple material to sort of frame the existing heritage, the Newlands building especially, and then along Cataract Way as well.
So this cafeteria you're proposing, is that just for like people who work there, or is it sort of for public to parking behind? And
Yeah, I mean, the idea for the development is we want it to be a community-oriented development. So the cafe will be used by the co-working space tenants, but it will be open to the public as well. I used to work in the woolen mill with Jerry Schultz. Found that there weren't very many cafe sort of opportunities in the area, so we think it could be a good use here.
my last question, it isn't anything you're presenting now, but I'm just not quite clear. So you're proposing then for the other part of the building along Cataraqui Street for 3-story townhouses? Is that what you're proposing there?
Yeah, that's correct. We're exploring that. Whatever we do, we want it to be consistent with the neighborhood, and we want it to complement the Broom Factory building. So we're looking at doing townhouses. We want the materiality of those townhouses to be consistent with the brick and the limestone, and maybe the pre-finished metal as well. But it needs to be seen as one sort of cohesive site.
Last question. Is the whole site designated, or just the part of the building? I mean, it almost seems like that place we're proposing to do the townhouses to be a separate piece of property. I'm just asking the question, is it all one piece of property, and is the whole property designated, or? That's the question.
That's a good question. Ryan, can you correct me if I'm wrong, but maybe I'll let you, because you sort of know the background to the purchase and sale agreement more than I do.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I can only go by what my understanding is, and that's the entire holding, the entire property is part of that designation bylaw. The entire holding is designated, so both phases are part of the same designation bylaw, and that's my understanding.
Yeah, so, and we've been in this situation before, and Don might want to add, but basically, it's Part 4 designation, the whole property is designated, but the heritage attributes are listed. So whatever is proposed has to be consistent with the heritage attributes and retain as many heritage attributes as possible and that kind of thing. New construction on a previous area that's not part of the heritage attributes is allowed, but subject to compatibility, I guess. Does that pretty much sum it up? Yeah, it's a good point. Okay, anyone else? Peter?
Thank you. This is kind of a rebirth of this building and this property. And I think my comment comes before my question. I think that it's a wonderful demonstration of why Heritage Kingston exists. Sometimes it seems that what we can do is very modest, and that there are many forces that have to be encountered on the way. But it's a bit of a dream come true, I think. The corner office, which Newlands designed, is clearly the main feature architecturally of this. And the restoration of it is fortunately possible. It will remain more as it was than any other part of the building. And in that respect, I'm very curious on page 75 as to why the windows, why the fenestration of the building, since the windows are not being, their dimensions are not being influenced, and because the door is being restored to what it was, why aren't the windows being restored to the drawing on page 68, which is, it's as shown on the drawing that's on the board, but on page 75, we've got, modern windows which have nothing to do with anything Newlands would have designed, inserted in it. That to me is inconsistent with the whole notion of what you're trying to get at.
So I think hopefully you'll be pleased with this answer. These are outdated drawings, and the plan is to restore most of the windows actually on the existing addition are in a state that we can restore or replicate. So if you disregard the window patterning on the office addition on that page and look to the image in front of you, they will be restored to the correct pattern. And yes.
Thank you.
Yes, Don.
Well, like the others, I'm very pleased, really pleased that this project is going ahead and going ahead so well. Just a comment, I agree with things that Mac has said. Comment on the concrete wing wall, which might be a bit of a challenge. It was mentioned as an attribute, but we recognized that it wasn't as important as some of the other attributes. But the important part was that we wanted there to be a kind of balance between the street view, between the brick wing going down Cataraqui and the concrete wall going along Cataraqui Street. And I'm pleased with the approach you've taken. I've just suggested that try to keep the wall reasonably high if that's possible, so it really does look like a wall and not just something incidental. And it's probably, I'm sure it's in poor condition, but it could be parged or something like that, and fortified from the inside or something like that to retain it if that works. So.
Councillor Schell.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I am equally thrilled that this is moving along. And interesting, including the facade of the Rideau Street structure, I can remember it was a great debate because some of us thought just the footprint would be fine. And the debate was that the concrete, it was one of the earliest concrete buildings, and that's why it was a big deal, but it isn't very pretty. It isn't in very good shape. So there certainly was a debate about, I was content with footprint. But beyond that, I just think it's very exciting, and I think you've got your foot in the door for what's, an up-and-coming part of the city that is very close to the water. So I'm looking forward very much to seeing what you do. I love the plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Catherine.
Well, being a neighbour, at least during the daytime of that building, I can't tell you how excited I am, and I think that it's that the design that you're working on is excellent for that building, and I really like the way that you have combined the original structures with modern day attributes like more glass and so on. And I do think myself that wall is, the concrete wall is important. And I like the idea of it looking really quite industrial above that, which I think is really in keeping with that site. I just think that from a community point of view, it really is going to deepen the usage of that area of the city, and that is just, it had to happen, and now it's happening, and I am more than happy about it. Congratulations.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, members of the public.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the architects and the developers for coming here today and explaining concepts. I've gone by this building hundreds of times and often wondered what its fate would be. And I took part in the saving of it. It came close to the wrecking ball a few years ago. So I've come a long way since then. I very much like the corner plans and the Cataraqui Street plans. That's the better part of the building, I think, by far. I think what you're proposing is, I guess, thematic with what's already there. You're making some changes, but you're going to be getting much more out of it. I'm going to disagree a little bit with the concrete wing. I think you should just take it down. It's ugly. It's not very useful as it is now. You may find things under there that you didn't expect, right? I mean, it's industrial from 100 years ago, right? Polluted and that kind of thing. And I like the concept of the townhouses and in behind there. It's a fairly large piece of property along the Rideau Street side. So if you could find a way to kind of, I guess, transition the materials there. I mean, most of the brick on the Cataraqui Street side in the corner is sound, right? It's fairly attractive. That's what you see when you go by there, and it's in keeping with other buildings in the area. The restored woolen mill and so forth, right? The whole neighborhood has, massive potential to be much more than it is. So that's, what I want to say. I mean, I just think you get much more out of it if you just take that down, and the value of that from a sort of beauty standpoint and even architecture really isn't very great. The value of the architecture is in the corner on the Cataraqui side. So that's against a heritage sort of a manifesto. I know it just does have heritage aspects. Like, it's over 100 years old. It's old, but it's lousy. And we've got a lot of old and good and great in Kingston. So maybe the committee wouldn't agree with me, but just in terms of higher values of utility for the site, take it down. What are we losing, right? Maybe you can put up a heritage panel there. You have a little section that's sort of trendy downtown. It's catching on. I'm really happy to see that, right? You walk around town, and there's more coming, right? To explain, what was there, because that is valuable. But we're over 100 years later, and as you say, it's been sitting vacant for 25 years. There's a reason, right? It hasn't been of commercial use. So, thanks.
Thank you. Yes, this is pre-consultation, so just to remind everyone, it's a Part 4 application that will be coming to us, and as such, we get to recommend to council a permit, or we get to say that we recommend a permit if that's the case. So that will be the next stage, will be the Part 4 application. Does anyone have anything to say that might influence the application? And now is the time. I think I can speak for the committee saying that we're all very excited in seeing you come back to us and getting started on this without too much delay, and help transform this part of the city and be a positive, as was said before by Peter, a positive example of adaptive reuse and of the reason for the existence of the Heritage Committee. So we're very grateful for you. Thank you. Thank you. Yes, Matt.
Sorry, the timing chart you gave us it said the winter of 2018. You mean the winter of? Oh, I guess winter starts January, doesn't it? Okay, sorry, come on.
All right. So we'll see you again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so now we're on the working group reports. The Heritage Properties Working Group report, if you just turn to page 83 in your package, you'll notice, because this addresses Mac's question about the KP update. So it's actually discussed at the Heritage Properties Working Group, and other than the tour, those are the two things that have happened since our last meeting. Did Paige have anything to add?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you. So just in terms of process, and I had a quick chat with Lanny out in the hallway, I just wanted to reassure the committee and certainly the members of the working group that, every intention to take our time to be very methodical and work through the process related to the designation bylaw. We're certainly not in any rush to do so and plan on, taking quite a bit of time to go through that process with you before we end up, in a position to bring something back to the committee and then on to council.
Yes, Mac, so at this point, because we're at the working group notes, your comments should be related to sort of what has been written, so what's on the record, and if you think there's something missing from the record, that kind of thing. Go ahead.
Just a question. I'm just curious as to, maybe this hasn't been decided yet. Are you looking at like designating the whole site, or are you looking to designate them as individual buildings and spaces?
Thank you, and through you. So that's still being discussed, at the working group level. I know that there is some drafting of a designation bylaw. There's the tour that just took place, looking at a detailed description of each of the buildings. So I think at this point, that's not 100% known. The other component to this too that needs to tie in is the cultural heritage component of that, and very much. So far, the work has been focused on the built heritage components, but there's the whole the cultural heritage component in the working group associated with that. We'll be making contributions, and most of that work will be led by Dr. Campbell, but that will be fully integrated into the process as well.
Yeah, so there's still quite a bit of work to be done. And there will be monthly reports from the Heritage Property Working Group because it's on their agenda every time until the work is done. So is there any other comment about the working group notes? We need a mover and a seconder to get the working group notes entered into the record. Yes, moved by Dawn, seconded by Patricia. Any discussion about what's in the notes? Okay, and is that both? Note that there's also the second set of notes from the Heritage Assets Working Group. We already heard which I think is the right place to talk about it, in the business. So hopefully that'll happen, even if it's in the notes, something that's business, like collections, additions, it should be in those placeholder, in the business, 8A and 8B, and those kinds of places. So I'd like to see that continue. So anyway, got nothing further to add than what's in the notes. Any comment? So we need to accept the two sets of notes. All those in favor? Opposed, and that carries. Okay, so then there's an update regarding emergency approvals. There's one item there, 168 King Street East. Is there anything that staff needs to say about that? Okay, it's you'll see the file number there. There are no motions. Are there any notices of motion? Yes, Don.
Just briefly, I want to mention, in a sense, apologize, because I had intended to bring a motion to this meeting about reviewing the structure of Heritage Kingston. And during the lead up to the deadline, I had some discussions with, or some input from some people about the best way of presenting this. And so I think there is a new version which is much reduced in size, so it just the bare bones, if you like, so that it doesn't specify in such great detail as to the composition of the working group and the mandate. Those things can be left to a later stage. I think the important thing is to get it to council and hopefully get a working group established. In fact, I had meant to bring copies of the proposed motion here, but I forgot to do that. I do have one copy here, but perhaps if anybody's interested, I could send it to them, but in advance of the next meeting, then I will bring it as a motion, and so you'll see it at that time.
Thanks, Don. So that was like an oral notice of motion where he has a motion for our next meeting, but the wording, the exact wording will be included with the package and in by the deadline, as opposed to printed in today's package and sort of part of the record for this month. Yeah, so there's nothing on the record from the motion at this point because it would have needed to be submitted in writing in time for the agenda printing. So if you're thinking of submitting a notice of motion, just in case you've never done this, notice of motion is advance notice that a motion is coming at the next meeting. And it's formally included in the agenda. People have a chance to then consider the motion for a month before the motion is actually presented. We've got that notice from Don orally, but it's not been formally entered into the record. That's where we are. Under other business, Councillor Schell wanted to talk about the foundations at Queen and King, so I'll let you go first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just that they're there. The archaeological dig that's going on there is incredible. A lot of foundations are now revealed. I've never seen anything like it in the city, actually. I'd love to find out a bit about the buildings. I don't know if I could ask staff or Alan McLeod who would be the best, or where to get a picture of what used to be there so that I can compare the foundations with what's being revealed. As I presume that once this archaeological dig is all over, and if there's an apartment building going up, it will all disappear, that's how these things work. But I sure want to make sure we get a really good record of all of this, and I'd love to be able to relate it, as I say, to what buildings used to be there. I gather it's one of the earliest areas of development in the city, and it's really remarkable. It's worth taking a look. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm wondering if staff can comment on how the archaeological work interacts with us here at Heritage Kingston. Like, do we get a report, an archaeological report? Can we ask for one? Is staff getting one that we could ask to be forwarded just to be included in our package under correspondence, or what are the options?
Mr. Chair, so archaeological assessments are required as part of the Planning Act approvals. So all of that work is being done now in advance of those approvals. The City of Kingston is the approval authority for archaeological assessments, so we are the sort of keepers of those reports when they are done. However, saying that, the province is the licensor of all archaeologists in the city, in the province. So they review all of these assessments to ensure that they meet the licensing requirements of the archaeologists and of their standards and guidelines. And they keep a public record of all of the assessments. So public access to these records needs to go through the ministry. So this is the Ministry of Tourism, Culture, and Sport. So unfortunately, I think it's out of our ability to have assessments brought to this committee for public viewing. Saying that, I would have to get permission, but we have offered a chance to go through some of them if there's an interest in that. There's that. As part of the development, the commemoration is one of the mitigation options that we look at from heritage impact perspective. And as I think Mr. Dixon mentioned, you've seen more and more of those coming up downtown, and that's a great opportunity to showcase what has been found on these sites, what was there and the history of it. We look to our Heritage Resource Center, who has a bit of a stockpile of old pictures, and try to get some options that way. So there are those two ways of sort of telling that story that, yes, once it's properly documented, it will be likely be removed or avoided. I imagine in this case it'll be removed. And there are means and proper ways of doing that through the archaeologist's license and the Ministry of Tourism, Culture, and Sport.
And I assume that if any artifacts are discovered in the archaeological dig, like not foundations, but say items, artifacts that could potentially be part of a collection, that could be another thing that could be pursued by the city for if anything is found that we might want to include in one of the civic collections.
Mr. Chair, I would defer that to our city curator. I can tell you that the Artifacts that are found are the legal responsibility of the archaeologist that found them. So I believe there's a permitting process that we have to get from the archaeologist to be able to show those, but I don't know.
Mr. Robertson?
Mr. Chair, those objects, as Ryan has explained, the license holder is a private archaeologist, and the site currently being excavated is not city-owned. The materials that we have in our collection now, which were transferred from the former Cataraqui Archaeological Research Foundation a couple of years ago, were all from sites that were owned by the city, and hence that transfer was made with the province as the intermediary in between. That's not to say that down the road, the city is a repository now. That would be a different negotiation, and certainly one that would take place with the city, between the city and the province. But as yet, we don't have an established agreement to do that. The province is actually in the process of reviewing all of its archaeological legislation, as is with heritage and other aspects of the Heritage Act. So this is one subject which has come up for discussion in the museum community, because many communities, similar to Kingston, have large archaeological collections connected with them, but they're not necessarily held by local community museums or other repositories. They're still in the hands of the licensed archaeologists. So there is a huge stockpile of materials that are out there that over the course of time, as archaeologists retire, that material has to go somewhere. And so that's, the province is trying to grapple with that right now.
Thank you. Do you have any other questions, Councillor? Does anyone else want to weigh in on that? Oh, I see Director of Planning. Yes, Ms. Agnew.
Thank you, and through you, might I suggest that staff just take a bit of time based on Councillor Schell's questions and come back to the next meeting with just some thoughts on what we can share with the committee, and certainly if there's information related to how we get or how you can access that as a private citizen from the ministry, we can certainly provide that to Heritage Kingston.
Thank you. That's great. Okay. All right. So now we just have, there's a couple items of correspondence in the package, and then we just have the date and time of next meeting. So that's, unfortunately, the week before Christmas, Wednesday, December 20th. It is a work week, though. Everybody else will be working, so that includes us. At 9:30, third Wednesday until further notice. And I need a motion to adjourn. By Megan, seconded by Dawn. All those in favor? This meeting is adjourned. Thank you very much.